Well, thank you for inviting me down here. And partly the reason that I'm here, I do not sing or I do not recite poetry, but I recently wrote a book named Diamondfield, Finding the Real Jack Davis. And with the name of this gathering, Diamondfield Jack, I thought we'd just take a minute and tell a lot of you who Diamondfield Jack was. But here in southern Idaho particularly, Diamondfield has been somewhat of a myth, a legend, and there's a park named after him, several saloons, songs written about him, and why a fascination about this guy by the name of Jack Davis, known or alias of Diamondfield Jack. Well, in February of 1896, word was received in Oakley, Idaho, 20 miles so south of here, that two young sheep herders had been discovered shot to death in their wagon. And as the word spread through the community, things started to get very excited, and suspicions were rampant as to who possibly shot these two young boys, 23 and 24 years old. Well, at the time, there was a battle going on between the sheep herders and the cattlemen down in the southern part of Idaho and the northwest part of Nevada. Now, this type of conflict was not new to the West. It happened whenever these two forces came together, there seemed to be conflict. But when these two boys were discovered dead, the little town of Oakley, here just 4 months before the two boys were killed, another sheep herder had been shot in the shoulder, and they did not feel that justice had ever been served to track down who had shot that sheep herder. 10 years before this all happened, another sheep herder had been killed by a cattleman, and the community likewise did not feel justice had been served. And so the community, the sheep herders, they organized, and they started a suspicion that a man by the name of Jack Davis could have been the perpetrator of this. And because they knew that Jack Davis had been involved in a little shootout with Tallman and who got shot in the shoulder. And he had been hired. This Jack Davis had been hired by John Sparks from the Sparks Herald Cattle Company to be an enforcer, as they referred to him, with an attempt to keep the sheep herders off from their grazing land. And they drew up a line down through the mountains, and they called it the deadline. And the sheep people never really participated in the agreement, but the cattlemen made this line, said that sheep herders are east and the cattlemen are all west of that deadline ridge. Well, when these two young men were found dead, they were considerably west of the deadline ridge, and so they immediately suspected this Diamondfield Jack as being the perpetrator, and they set out to immediately hire William Bora, who was a young attorney in Boise, and later became the U.S. Senator. I'm sure all of you have heard of William Bora. Well, he in turn hired another prosecuting attorney from Utah, an ex-Supreme Court justice, and along with the prosecuting attorney of Cassia County, they proceeded to put their case together. And 9 months later or so, Jack Davis was tracked down in Yuma, Arizona. And he was at a convenient location when they located him. He was in the Yuma prison. Well, how he got there, when he went down to Yuma, there was a dog running the streets that was tormenting his horse, and he shot the horse, or shot the dog. Well, unfortunately, the dog was owned by the sheriff. And so consequently, Jack Davis ended up in the jail there in Yuma. And as soon as the warrant came out for his arrest, the sheepmen sent a couple of deputies, went down and brought him back. So they proceeded to, a month later, bring him to trial. And another later to be famous Idahoan, James Hawley, was hired to be the defense attorney. James Hawley later became governor of the state of Idaho. And so William Borah and James Hawley proceeded to try to convict this man and also save him from conviction. Well, the jury, which was made up primarily of sheepmen, they somewhat had decided that Davis was guilty, and therefore what turned out to be very circumstantial evidence, which the jury went ahead and believed it and convicted him, sentenced him to hang. Well, as this case went to the Idaho Supreme Court, it went to the federal district courts, courts of appeal, back to the U.S. Supreme Court, and then back to the Idaho Supreme Court. And during this time, it went before the Board of Pardons, which was made up of the governor, Secretary of State, and the Attorney General. It went before that board 23 times, with James Hawley trying to prove that this Jack Davis was in fact not guilty. One of the principal pieces of witness, or of evidence that they used, was that he was known to be 18 miles, a little bit southwest of the site where the two boys were killed. And that was at sunup, and he was known to be 18 miles southeast of the Brown Ranch, down in Nevada at noon. So someplace between 4 and 5 hours, he would have had to have ridden his horse from the Brown Ranch up to the site of killing, and then back down to the Boers Ranch, which turned out to be 58 miles. And it was pretty clear that a horse and a rider would have a hard time riding 58 miles on a horse, go to the site of killing and involve themselves in that, and then ride down to the boar's nest without, as the manager of the boar's nest testified, the horses were not lathered up at all and had no evidence of being ridden hard. And they had time to fix their dinner and clean up before 1 o'clock. Well, the interesting thing about the case, as time moves on quickly, but it was said by the foreman of the jury after the trial. He made the statement to a number of people. He says it didn't matter whether Jack Davis was guilty or not. He was a bad enough guy that he should be hung on general principles. Well, that became, as other witnesses testified to the Board of Pardons and whatever, that this became a general feeling down in that area, that it just didn't matter whether he was guilty or not. we have our man, and we want to have him sacrificed to justify or to atone for these other killings and shootings. Well, Jack remained in prison over in Albion, and until 1901, when he was transferred to the state penitentiary, where he remained until December of 1902, at which time the Board of Pardons had heard enough evidence that, and plus, a year after he was convicted, 2 other men came forth and confessed that they had killed the 2 sheep herders. They had ridden upon their camp, got into an argument, and ended up in a little bit of a shooting, and they shot the 2 sheep herders. Despite this evidence of 2 confessants, and they had evidence, clear evidence, that these 2 men, in fact, had shot the 2 boys. But nonetheless, the community did not want to hear this new evidence, and so he remained in prison for nearly 7 years. But finally was pardoned in 1902 and left Idaho, went to Tonopah, Nevada, and there discovered gold and became a multimillionaire and a model citizen the rest of his life. And in my research, I have found over 300 newspaper articles after he left Idaho across the United States, stories and deeds and other facts about Diamondfield Jack. And so he has been a very fascinating person here in Idaho, and there are still a lot of people that believe that he's guilty, and of course a lot of people that feels that he wasn't guilty. So if any of you would like to read the whole story, I have written a book with a great deal of research. I was able to find the original trial papers up in the Historical Society. 65 witnesses were testified at his trial, and they had that all recorded longhand, but it was all in evidence and amounted to a great deal of study. But it's been a great experience to track this man down and find out that he's somewhat of a legend or a myth, but an interesting character. Thank you.